She walked into the lavish ballroom dressed simply, her calm smile hiding the truth. The black woman everyone thought was the help. The moment of injustice was swift and brutal. The bride pointed at her, her voice a sharp crack in the festive air, and shouted, "Who let the cleaning lady sit here?" The crowd laughed, a wave of cruel amusement that crashed against the walls. Then a profound silence fell, a stillness so deep it froze the room. Because that cleaning lady? She wasn't staff. She was the millionaire who owned the very venue. And she was the groom's mother. By the night's end, the bride's perfect wedding would become a public reckoning, a spectacle of her own making. Her arrogance, so proudly displayed, would cost her everything she thought she had secured. Before we find out what happens next, let us know in the comments what city you're watching from. And if this story is already hitting home, make sure you hit that like button. The air in the grand ballroom of Brooks Estates glittered. It was an atmosphere spun from pure fantasy, where money and dreams had merged to create a perfect moment. Crystal chandeliers, each one a universe of tiny, light-fracturing stars, hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, golden glow over the sea of guests below. Laughter and the gentle clinking of champagne flutes provided a soft, melodic soundtrack to the evening. Servers in crisp black and white uniforms moved with a silent, practiced grace, their silver trays laden with delicate appetizers and sparkling drinks. They were almost invisible, their purpose to facilitate the magic, not to be a part of it. The head table was a masterpiece of floral arrangements, a cascade of white roses and lush greenery that seemed to spill onto the pristine linen tablecloth. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. Elaine Brooks entered not with a grand announcement, but with a quiet grace that was easily overlooked in the sea of expensive gowns and tailored tuxedos. She wore a simple, elegant cream-colored dress. It was impeccably tailored, speaking of quality rather than flash. But in this room, it was an act of deliberate understatement. Her hair was styled neatly, her makeup subtle. She carried a small, understated clutch, and her only jewelry was a pair of pearl earrings that shimmered softly in the light. She looked like a guest, perhaps a distant relative or a friend of the family, but she lacked the peacocking aura of the other attendees. She didn't seek the spotlight, she simply moved through the room with a calm, observant smile, her eyes taking in every detail, not with the pride of an owner, but with the quiet scrutiny of someone waiting for a truth to reveal itself. She found an empty seat at a table near the front, not quite at the head table, but close enough to have a clear view of the bride and groom. She sat down, her posture poised and dignified, and placed her clutch on her lap. For a few moments, she was just another face in the crowd, a quiet observer of the joyous occasion. The guests at her table offered polite, if slightly dismissive, smiles before turning back to their conversations about summer homes and stock portfolios. To them, she was unremarkable. She was background noise. And then Madison saw her. The bride, Madison Clark, was the radiant center of this glittering universe. Her white dress was a confection of lace and silk. Her diamonds blazed under the chandeliers, and her smile was a carefully constructed work of art. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a picture of bridal bliss. But as her eyes swept across the room, they landed on Elaine. The perfect smile froze. It didn't just fade. It cracked and hardened, like a porcelain doll dropped on a marble floor. Her eyes, a moment before filled with feigned joy, narrowed into two sharp points of ice. The transformation was instantaneous and startling. The mask of the happy bride fell away, revealing something cold and ugly beneath. She leaned over to her new husband, Ethan, and whispered something sharp and urgent. Ethan's face, which had been beaming with love, clouded with confusion. He looked to where she was pointing, saw Elaine, and a flicker of unease crossed his features. But he did nothing. He was a man caught in the dazzling headlights of his own wedding, momentarily paralyzed. Madison, however, felt no such paralysis. She straightened up, her posture rigid with indignation. She raised her voice, not quite a shout, but loud enough to slice through the ambient chatter and turn heads in their immediate vicinity. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine condescension that was far more insulting than a direct yell. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Elaine. "The staff table is over there." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. It started at the tables closest to the front and radiated outward. Some guests looked confused, others smirked. It was a moment of high drama, a crack in the perfect facade of the evening. Elaine didn't flinch. She simply looked up at Madison, her expression unreadable, her calm a stark contrast to the bride's brittle fury. There was no anger in her eyes, only a profound, quiet disappointment that seemed to absorb all the ugliness being thrown at her. The lack of a reaction seemed to infuriate Madison even more. She felt her authority being challenged, her perfect day being tainted by the presence of someone she deemed unworthy. She doubled down, her voice rising now, laced with a shrill note of entitlement. She waved her hand impatiently, trying to summon the event manager. "Carson!" she called out, her tone sharp and imperious. "Carson Hale! Get over here!" Carson, a man whose career was built on placating the wealthy and powerful, scurried over, his face a mask of anxious service. "Yes, Mrs. Clark Brooks? Is everything all right?" "No, everything is not all right," Madison snapped, not bothering to lower her voice. She gestured toward Elaine again, a look of pure disgust on her face. "Who let the help sit here, at a guest table? This is my wedding, not a soup kitchen. I want her removed. Now!" The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The murmurs died down, replaced by a wave of shocked gasps. This was no longer a minor faux pas. It was a public execution of dignity. The room became a theater of humiliation. Guests stared, their faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and a kind of morbid fascination. Ethan looked absolutely stunned, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked from his new wife to Elaine, a silent war raging behind his eyes. But still he remained silent, a statue of inaction. Nearby, a young waitress named Jasmine Rivera froze in her tracks. She was holding a tray of empty champagne flutes, and for a second she feared she might drop them all. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the furious bride to the calm, composed woman in the cream dress. Jasmine had seen entitled guests before. She had been yelled at for things that weren't her fault, treated as invisible, but this was different. This was a deliberate act of cruelty, a public stripping of someone's humanity for sport. And it made her stomach turn. The humiliation wasn't just Elaine's, it was shared by everyone in the room who had a shred of decency. It hung in the glittering air, a foul stain on a supposedly perfect day. The sting of the injustice was immediate, sharp, and unforgettable. A profound stillness fell over the ballroom. The light chatter, the clinking of glasses, the soft music from the string quartet. It all evaporated, sucked into a vacuum of stunned silence. Every eye in the room was fixed on the woman in the cream dress. In that moment, Elaine Brooks was the center of 100 different private dramas playing out in the minds of the guests. They expected tears, a shouted defense, a hurried, embarrassed retreat. They expected a scene. But Elaine gave them none of that. She rose from her chair slowly, each movement deliberate and filled with a weight that defied the insult just hurled at her. There was no tremor in her hands, no flush of anger on her cheeks. Her spine was straight, her head held high. She was the very picture of composure, a small island of calm in a sea of awkward tension. She met Madison's furious gaze, and for a long moment, the two women were locked in a silent battle of wills. Madison's was a will of fire and fury, brittle and loud. Elaine's was a will of stone and water, ancient and unyielding. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, yet it carried across the frozen room with perfect clarity. It was not the voice of a victim. It was the voice of someone holding a truth so powerful it needed no volume. "You're right," she said, her words gentle, almost conversational. The calm delivery was a disarming counterpoint to the venom of Madison's attack. A smirk flickered across Madison's lips. She thought she had won. She thought this was a surrender. She leaned forward, eager to savor her victory. But Elaine wasn't finished. She added, still in that same quiet tone, "Some people don't know where they belong." The words were a perfectly polished mirror. They were simple, direct, and devastatingly effective. She had taken Madison's insult and handed it right back, but without any of the bride's shrill cruelty. The smirk on Madison's face faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed her eyes. Was she being insulted? The help couldn't possibly be that clever, could they? She looked to her bridesmaids for validation, who offered sycophantic little smiles, but the confidence in her victory was shaken. Ethan fidgeted beside her, his discomfort now a palpable aura. He finally found his voice, though it was weak and uncertain. "Madison, maybe we should just let it go. It's a misunderstanding." He tried to place a calming hand on her arm, but she snatched it away as if his touch were a betrayal. To her, his attempt at de-escalation was a sign of weakness, a failure to stand with her. Nearby, Jasmine the waitress watched, mesmerized. She had stopped trying to clear tables. Her focus was entirely on Elaine. She saw what the others missed. She saw the quiet authority in Elaine's eyes, the unshakable self-possession in her posture. It wasn't the defiance of an employee. It was the regal bearing of someone who was completely, utterly in control. It sent a shiver down Jasmine's spine. She knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that this was no ordinary woman. Elaine gave a small, polite nod, a gesture that encompassed the entire room. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice still even. She turned and walked away from the table. She didn't scurry, she didn't flee. She walked with a measured, graceful pace toward the grand ballroom doors. Her exit was as quiet and dignified as her entrance. She left behind a room thick with unresolved tension, a stunned crowd uncertain of what they had just witnessed. As soon as the doors swung shut behind Elaine, Madison tried to reclaim the moment. She let out a sharp, theatrical laugh that sounded more like shattering glass than joy. "Can you believe the nerve?" she said to her bridesmaids, her voice pitched high and bright. "Some people just have no sense of boundaries. It's all about maintaining standards, you know?" She tried to rally her audience, to paint herself as the wrong party, the defender of decorum. Her bridesmaids murmured their agreement, but the larger crowd was not so easily swayed. The magic of the evening had been broken. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Low whispers replaced the earlier laughter. A man at a nearby table leaned over to his wife and muttered, "That was incredibly cruel." His wife nodded, her eyes fixed on the doors through which Elaine had disappeared. The atmosphere in the glittering ballroom had become heavy, tainted by a spectacle of casual cruelty. The injustice of it all was a ghost at the feast, a silent, unforgettable guest that would linger long after the music faded. The morning light had been soft and forgiving as it streamed through the panoramic windows of the Brooks Estate's main office. Hours before the first guest was set to arrive, Elaine Brooks was already there, walking the grounds of the venue she had built from the ground up. She wasn't dressed as a CEO. She wore simple, comfortable trousers and a soft blouse, her presence unassuming. She ran a hand along a polished mahogany bar, checked the firmness of a floral arrangement, and spoke in low, respectful tones to the catering staff, asking about their needs and thanking them for their hard work. This place was more than a business to her. It was a testament to a life of struggle and perseverance. It was her legacy. And today it was to be the setting for her son's wedding. Elaine was a self-made millionaire, a fact she rarely advertised. Her company, the Brooks Hospitality Group, was a quiet giant in the luxury real estate and hospitality industry. It owned a portfolio of exclusive hotels, boutique resorts, and high-end event venues across the country. Brooks Estates, with its sprawling gardens and opulent ballroom, was the jewel in her crown. She had chosen to attend her son's wedding in simple attire for a very specific reason. It was a test, a final crucial test for the woman who was about to become her daughter-in-law. For over a year, Madison Clark had been a phantom in Elaine's life. Every attempt Elaine had made to meet her son's fiancée in person had been artfully dodged. There was always a last-minute business trip, a sudden illness, a prior engagement that couldn't possibly be broken. The excuses were always plausible, delivered with a syrupy sweetness over the phone, but the pattern was undeniable. Madison didn't want to meet her. Elaine had seen the photos Ethan proudly showed her, a beautiful, polished woman who looked perfect on his arm. But Elaine knew that photographs could lie. They showed you the surface, but they told you nothing about the heart. Her son, Ethan, was her whole world. She had raised him alone, and she had poured all her hopes and dreams into him. He was a good man, kind and compassionate, but sometimes, she feared, a little blind. He was so in love with Madison's beauty, her charm, her ambition, that he couldn't see the faint red flags that Elaine could sense even from a distance. She heard it in the way Madison talked about service workers in passing comments Ethan would relay. She felt it in the subtle but persistent pressure on Ethan to distance himself from his more humble roots. So Elaine had made a decision. She would attend the wedding not as Elaine Brooks, the powerful CEO and owner of the venue, but as simply Elaine, Ethan's mother. She wanted to see Madison in her natural element, to observe how she treated people when she wasn't trying to impress a wealthy future mother-in-law. She wanted to see with her own eyes the true character of the woman her son had chosen. She had hoped with all her heart that her fears were unfounded. She had prayed that she would see a woman who was kind, gracious, and worthy of her son's love. Now, standing in the quiet solitude of a secluded garden path just outside the ballroom, the echo of Madison's cruel words still ringing in her ears, Elaine knew the truth. The test was over, and Madison had failed spectacularly. The humiliation had stung, yes. It was a sharp, bitter pang that reminded her of a time long ago when she had been invisible, when people had looked through her as if she were nothing more than the uniform she wore. But beneath the sting, there was a cold, hard clarity. This was not about her pride. This was about her son's future. The woman he was about to bind his life to was someone who measured a person's worth by their perceived station. Someone who wielded public shaming as a tool to enforce her own fragile sense of superiority. And that was a poison that Elaine could not and would not allow into her family. She had seen the truth she had come for, and now she had to decide what to do with it. The story of Elaine Brooks was not written in boardrooms and stock markets. It was forged in the quiet, lonely hours before dawn, in the endless hallways of luxury hotels where she had once been the one who was invisible. She was born to a family with nothing but love to their name, and from a young age, she understood the value of hard work. Her life took a sharp turn when she found herself a single mother to a beautiful baby boy, Ethan. The boy's father had been a fleeting promise, a man who disappeared when the reality of responsibility set in. Elaine was left alone, with a fierce, protective love for her son, and a burning determination to give him a life better than her own. To make ends meet, she took a job as a cleaning lady at a downtown hotel. It was grueling work for little pay. She would wake before the sun, her body aching from the day before, and get Ethan ready for daycare. Then she would spend her days on her hands and knees, scrubbing floors, changing linens, and cleaning up after people who never even saw her. She was a ghost in the machine of luxury. Guests would walk past her in the hallways without a glance, their conversations continuing uninterrupted, as if she were a piece of furniture. She saw the casual entitlement, the thoughtless messes left behind, the condescension in a tone of voice, but she never allowed it to make her bitter. Instead, it fueled her. She was a keen observer. While she cleaned, she listened. She learned. She saw the inefficiencies in the hotel's operations. She saw the ways in which guest services could be improved. She saw the disconnect between the management and the staff who kept the place running. She started saving every spare dollar, a small secret fund that grew with painstaking slowness. She read books on business and real estate at the public library during her lunch breaks, her mind hungry for knowledge. Her first break came when she overheard two real estate developers in a hotel lobby discussing a small, rundown apartment building they were planning to unload for a loss. They saw it as a liability. Elaine, having spent weeks studying city development plans at the library, saw potential. She knew a new public transit line was scheduled to be built just 2 blocks away. She took her entire life savings, a meager sum, and combined it with a small loan from a credit union that believed in her vision. She bought the building. For the next year, she worked tirelessly. She continued her cleaning job during the day and spent her nights and weekends renovating the building herself, learning plumbing and electrical work from library books and helpful hardware store employees. She treated her first tenants with the respect and dignity she had so rarely been shown, and in return, they were loyal and paid their rent on time. She used the profits from that first building to buy another, then another. She taught her son Ethan the lessons she had learned. They didn't live a lavish life, even as her portfolio grew. She made sure he understood the value of $1 and the importance of humility. She would take him with her to the buildings, and he would help her with small repairs or planting flowers in the community garden. She would tell him, "Never look down on anyone, Ethan. The person cleaning the floor has a story you know nothing about. They have dreams, and they have dignity. Your father, he judged people by their wallets. Don't ever be that man." This philosophy was the bedrock of her life and her business. When she finally founded the Brooks Hospitality Group, her core mission was to create an environment where every single employee, from the dishwasher to the general manager, was treated with respect. Her success was built on the foundation of the very people society so often overlooked. That was why Madison's behavior over the past year had been more than just concerning. It had been a deep personal affront to everything Elaine held dear. Madison was the embodiment of the people who had once looked through her, the people who saw a uniform, not a human being. The casual cruelty she had displayed in the ballroom wasn't just an insult to Elaine. It was an insult to the memory of the young single mother who had scrubbed floors and dreamed of a better life. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a test of character. It was Elaine's last desperate hope to see if there was any depth, any kindness, beneath Madison's polished, arrogant surface. The sting of the public humiliation was real, but it was overshadowed by the cold, heavy certainty of what it confirmed. She had seen the truth. Madison didn't just look down on the help. She looked down on people like his mother had been, and that, Elaine knew, was a flaw in character so profound that love alone could never fix it. Jasmine Rivera's feet ached. She had been on the go for 10 hours straight, balancing trays, refilling glasses, and smiling at guests who barely registered her existence. It was part of the job, the invisibility. Most of the time, she didn't mind. She was a student, working her way through community college, and this job paid the bills. She was good at it. She was quick, efficient, and had a talent for fading into the background. But tonight, she couldn't fade away. What she had witnessed had shaken her out of her professional detachment. In the relative quiet of the service corridor behind the ballroom, she leaned against a wall, the scene replaying in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. The bride's beautiful face contorted with ugly disdain. The sharp, cutting words, "Who let the help sit here?" The collective gasp of the crowd. And most vividly, the image of the woman in the cream dress, her unshakable calm, her quiet dignity in the face of such a vicious public attack. It had felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. Jasmine had seen plenty of rich people act entitled. She'd been snapped at for being too slow with a drink, condescended to for not knowing the vintage of a particular wine. It came with the territory. But this was different. This wasn't impatience or arrogance born of privilege. This was deliberate personal cruelty. It was a performance designed to inflict maximum humiliation. And for what? Because a woman sat at the wrong table. It didn't make sense. A thought nagged at her, a small detail that didn't fit. The woman hadn't been wearing a uniform. The staff at Brooks Estates had a strict dress code: black pants, a white button-down shirt, and a black vest. The woman, Elaine Brooks as the bride had called her, was dressed like a guest. A simple guest, perhaps, but a guest nonetheless. Driven by a sudden, insistent curiosity, Jasmine walked over to the event manager's station, a small alcove where the master guest list and seating chart were kept. Carson Hale was nowhere in sight. He was likely still in the ballroom, trying to smooth over the crater Madison had just blown in the middle of the evening. The guest list was on a clipboard, a long, alphabetized printout. Jasmine's finger ran down the list of names under B. Benson, Billingsley, Bauer, but no Brooks. That was odd. If she was a guest, her name should be here. Then her eyes scanned the top of the page. It listed the key contacts for the event: the bride, the groom, the wedding planner, and the venue owner. Her breath caught in her throat. Right there, in crisp black print, were the words, "Venue contact Elaine Brooks, CEO, Brooks Hospitality Group." Jasmine stared at the name, her heart starting to pound against her ribs. Elaine Brooks, the woman in the cream dress, the CEO, the owner of this entire magnificent estate. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap in her mind. The woman Madison had just publicly humiliated as the help was not only a guest, she was the owner of the very ground Madison was standing on. And if she was Ethan's mother, that meant... A wave of nausea and righteous anger washed over Jasmine. The sheer monumental arrogance of it was breathtaking. She thought about the potential consequences. If she said something, she could lose her job. Carson was a spineless manager who always sided with the wealthy clients. He would have no problem firing a part-time waitress to appease an angry bride. Fear coiled in her stomach. She needed this job. Her tuition was due next month. She should just keep her head down, finish her shift, and forget she ever saw anything. It wasn't her business. But then she thought of Elaine's face. The quiet strength, the profound disappointment. She thought of the injustice of it all. How could she stand by and do nothing? Her own mother had worked service jobs her whole life, and she had always taught Jasmine to stand up for what was right, even when it was scary. "Your silence is a vote for the bully," her mother used to say. Her conscience warred with her fear. For a few long moments she stood frozen in the corridor, the clipboard trembling slightly in her hand. Then she made a choice. She couldn't confront Madison directly. That would be professional suicide. But she could do something. She could make sure the groom knew exactly what had just happened, and who his fiancée had just insulted. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She found Ethan's number on the event contact sheet. She created a new message, her thumb hovering over the letters. She had to be careful, anonymous, direct. She typed out a short, simple message. "You need to talk to Elaine Brooks right now. You have no idea who she is." She hesitated for a second, then changed it. He needed to understand the gravity. She deleted the last sentence and retyped. "Ask your wife who Elaine Brooks is. Then ask yourself if you know your wife at all." No, that was too dramatic. She deleted it again, her mind racing. Simple was better. She went back to her first instinct, but with a crucial addition. She typed, "You need to talk to Elaine Brooks right now. She is on the guest list. Check with your venue manager. This is more serious than you think." It was enough. It was a spark. It was up to him to fan it into a flame. She took a deep breath and hit send. The message disappeared from her screen with a soft whoosh. A sense of terror and relief washed over her in equal measure. She had done it. She had thrown a small stone into the gears of the perfect wedding. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she could no longer be a silent witness. Her quiet act of courage had just set in motion a chain of events that no one could predict. The bridal suite at Brooks Estates was a sanctuary of silk, champagne, and self-congratulation. While the tension still simmered in the ballroom below, up here Madison was holding court, basking in the glow of her perceived victory. She had kicked off her designer heels and was perched on a plush velvet chaise, a fresh glass of champagne in her hand. Her bridesmaids, a flock of women who mirrored her own sharp-edged beauty and sense of entitlement, gathered around her like ladies-in-waiting. "Honestly, the nerve of some people," Madison said, taking a triumphant sip. She laughed, a sound that was both brittle and loud. "Did you see her face?" She just stood there, like she had no idea what was happening. Probably the first time she's ever been in a room this nice without a mop in her hand. Her friends giggled in dutiful agreement. "You totally put her in her place, Maddie," one of them said, her voice dripping with admiration. "It's your day. You have every right to demand perfection." "Exactly," Madison declared, pointing a finger for emphasis. "It's about standards. If you let one of them get comfortable, they all start thinking they belong. Before you know it, the kitchen staff is doing the conga line through your reception." The door to the suite opened and Carson Hale, the event manager, scurried in. He was holding a bottle of champagne, a peace offering, his face plastered with an obsequious smile. He needed to make sure the bride, his most important client, was happy. His business depended on it. "Mrs. Clark Brooks," he began, his voice oozing sycophantic charm. "I am so sorry about that disturbance. It never should have happened. I've already spoken to security. It seems there was a mix-up at the door." He was lying, of course. He had no idea who Elaine was, but he knew his job was to validate the client's narrative. Madison waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's fine now, Carson. I handled it." She gave him a smug smile. "But you really should be more careful about who you let wander in. It lowers the tone of the entire event." Carson chuckled along, a nervous, high-pitched sound. Of course, you are absolutely right. A five-star experience means five-star guests. We're normally much more diligent." He saw Madison's mother, a woman who was an older, more hardened version of Madison, enter the room. He directed his next comment to her. "You raised a daughter who knows how to set boundaries. It's admirable." Madison's mother preened at the compliment. She sat next to her daughter, patting her hand. "That's my girl," she said, her voice filled with a proprietary arrogance that explained exactly where Madison had learned it. "You can't be afraid to tell people where they belong. That's how the world works, dear. There's us and there's them. You have to keep the line clear." The scene was a closed loop of self-congratulatory elitism. Inside this bubble, they were the heroes of the story, the defenders of class and order. They laughed about the cleaning lady's simple dress and her quiet demeanor, twisting her dignity into a caricature of weakness. They were completely insulated from the reality of their actions, cocooned in a shared delusion of their own superiority. The omniscient eye saw the profound irony of the moment. Here was Madison Clark mocking the woman who owned the very chaise she was lounging on, the champagne she was drinking, the air she was breathing. She was bragging about setting boundaries in a house that wasn't hers, to a man whose salary was paid by the very woman she had just scorned. Her entire world, in this moment, was a fragile illusion held together by the quiet grace of the person she believed she had vanquished. But the truth was a time bomb, ticking silently beneath the floorboards of the bridal suite. And thanks to a text message from a courageous waitress, the fuse had just been lit. Madison and her mother laughed, secure in their world, completely unaware that the ground was about to crumble beneath their feet. Ethan found his mother by the lake. The sun had set, and the manicured gardens of the estate were bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of twilight. The water was a sheet of dark glass, perfectly still, reflecting the first stars pricking the deep blue of the sky. Elaine was standing at the water's edge, her back to the glittering lights and muffled sounds of the reception. She wasn't crying. She was simply standing there, her posture as poised as ever, her reflection in the water a calm, unbroken silhouette. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest as he approached. His mind was a chaotic storm of confusion, shame, and a dawning, terrible sense of dread. He had received the text message 10 minutes earlier. The words had been cryptic, unsettling. "You need to talk to Elaine Brooks right now." The name had struck him as odd. He didn't know an Elaine Brooks. But the urgency of the message had propelled him out of the ballroom, away from Madison's triumphant retelling of the incident, and into the cool night air. He had a sick feeling in his stomach, a premonition that he was on the verge of discovering something he didn't want to know. He had found Carson first, his voice tight with an anxiety he couldn't name. "Who is Elaine Brooks?" he had asked. Carson, flustered and eager to avoid any more trouble, had simply said, "She's your mother, Mr. Clark. I mean your mother's name." Ethan had stared at him, bewildered. "My mother's name is Elaine. Her last name is Brooks. Why would someone text me her full name like that?" The pieces weren't connecting. He just knew he had to find her. A staff member told him she had been seen walking toward the gardens. Now, seeing her standing so still and alone by the lake, his shame intensified. He had stood by, silent and frozen, while his own mother was publicly humiliated. He had allowed his new wife to speak to her in a way he wouldn't tolerate from a stranger on the street. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. Elaine didn't turn around immediately. She continued to look out over the water for a long moment before she finally faced him. Her eyes weren't angry. They were filled with a deep, bottomless sadness that was far worse than any anger he could have imagined. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Madison, she didn't know. She gets carried away. She's just stressed about the wedding. It was a mistake." He was making excuses, he knew it, but he didn't know what else to do. He was trying to patch a gaping wound with flimsy bandages. Elaine's expression didn't change. She just looked at him, her gaze steady and searching. "Was it a mistake, Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft but piercing. "Or did you just see who she really is for the first time?" She let the question hang in the air between them, heavy and unavoidable. He had no answer. He just shook his head, a knot of guilt tightening in his throat. "You saw her heart, son," Elaine continued, her voice still quiet, still devoid of accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. "When she looked at me, she didn't see your mother. She didn't even see a person. She saw a servant, someone beneath her, someone she could dismiss." "She'll apologize," Ethan pleaded, desperate. "I'll make her apologize. We can fix this." A faint, sad smile touched Elaine's lips. "An apology won't change what's in her heart." She took a step closer to him, her eyes never leaving his, and then she delivered the blow that would shatter his world. "This place, Ethan. Brooks Estates. It's not just a venue I recommended." Ethan looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "The name, Ethan. Brooks Estates." She paused, letting the weight of the name settle in the space between them. "I built this place. I own it. I own all of it." The words seemed to move in slow motion, hitting Ethan one by one like physical blows. He felt the blood drain from his face. His entire body went cold. He stared at his mother, at the woman who had raised him, the woman who had worked her fingers to the bone to give him everything, and he saw her for the first time through Madison's eyes. Then he saw her as she truly was, the powerful, brilliant, self-made woman who had built an empire Madison had just treated like her personal ashtray. His mind reeled, trying to process the enormity of it. The constant excuses Madison had made to avoid meeting her, the subtle condescension he had chosen to ignore, the vicious public attack in the ballroom. It all coalesced into a single horrifying image of his fiancée's character. She hadn't just insulted a guest. She hadn't just humiliated his mother. She had mocked the very source of the wealth and luxury she so desperately craved, in the house that his mother had built, all while his mother was right there, watching. A tremor started in his hands and spread through his entire body. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He could only stare at his mother, his eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. The full weight of his fiancée's disrespect and his own unforgivable silence crashed down on him all at once. The perfect wedding, the beautiful bride, the glittering future. It all dissolved in that one terrible moment of truth by the silent, watching lake. The night of the wedding, Elaine did not go home to weep. She did not rage. She went to her office, a quiet, minimalist space in a downtown high-rise that overlooked the city lights. The pain and disappointment were a heavy weight in her chest, a deep ache for the son she loved and the future she had hoped he would have. But she had learned long ago to channel her pain into action. Grief was a private matter. Business was about clarity and decision. She sat at her large, uncluttered desk, the city glowing like a carpet of scattered jewels below her. She was no longer the understated mother of the Groom. She was Elaine Brooks, CEO, a woman who had fought for every inch of her success and who understood the precise mechanics of power. She picked up the phone and made a single quiet call. It was not to her son. It was not to a lawyer. It was to her executive assistant, a sharp, fiercely loyal woman named Maria. "Maria, it's Elaine," she said, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the emotional turmoil she felt. "I need you to do a few things for me first thing in the morning. I'm sending you an email with the details now." There was a pause as Maria, ever efficient, opened the email. "I see it, Ms. Brooks." "First," Elaine instructed, her tone leaving no room for negotiation, "I want you to rescind the Clark wedding contract effective immediately. Cite a breach of the venue's Code of Conduct Policy, Section 7, regarding disrespect towards staff and ownership. Second, freeze all payments to the vendors associated with the Clark Brooks wedding. The caterers, the florist, the band, all of them. I want a full stop on every check. We will handle their invoices directly later, but for now, nothing goes through the Clark family's accounts." Maria's fingers could be heard typing furiously on her keyboard on the other end of the line. "Understood. Rescind contract, freeze payments. What about the deposit?" "They have forfeited it," Elaine said simply, "per the clause in the contract." "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied. "Is there anything else?" "One more thing," Elaine said, her eyes fixed on the distant lights. "Schedule a meeting for 10 a.m. tomorrow in the main boardroom at the Estates. I want Madison Clark, her parents, and the event manager, Carson Hale, to be there. The invitation should state that it is an urgent and mandatory meeting regarding a serious incident at the venue. Make it sound official and non-negotiable. I will handle the rest tomorrow." "It's done, Ms. Brooks," Maria said, her voice a mix of efficiency and a clear, unspoken understanding that something significant had just happened. "Thank you, Maria," Elaine said, and ended the call. She leaned back in her chair, the silence of the office settling around her. The call had taken less than 2 minutes. With a few quiet words, she had set the gears of a powerful machine in motion. The financial fallout would be swift and severe. The carefully constructed world of Madison Clark was about to be systematically dismantled. This wasn't about revenge. Revenge was a messy, emotional indulgence. This was about consequences. It was about teaching a lesson that should have been learned long ago. That character is how you treat people who you believe can do nothing for you. And tomorrow morning in her boardroom, Madison was going to learn that the person she thought was nothing was, in fact, everything. The stage was set. The reckoning was scheduled. The message arrived the next morning on Madison's phone via a crisp corporate email. It was from the executive office of the Brooks Hospitality Group. The subject line read, "Urgent mandatory meeting regarding Clark Brooks event." The body of the email was brief and formal, summoning her parents, and the event manager, Carson Hale, to the main office at Brooks Estates at 10 a.m. It cited a serious incident and stated that their attendance was required to resolve the matter. Madison read it while sipping a mimosa in the lavish hotel suite she and Ethan had booked for their wedding night. Ethan wasn't there. He had come back late last night, his face pale and grim, and had muttered something about needing some air. He had slept in the adjoining room, A knot of irritation tightened in Madison's chest. He was being so dramatic. She showed the email to her mother, who had just arrived for their planned post-wedding brunch. "Can you believe this?" Madison scoffed. "They're probably going to grovel and offer us a refund because of that woman yesterday. They're terrified of a bad review." Her mother read the email over her shoulder, a smug smile on her face. "Of course they are. They know who we are. This is your chance to really put the screws to them, darling. Demand a full refund, maybe even compensation for the emotional distress." And so, Madison arrived at the corporate wing of Brooks Estates not with a sense of dread, but with an air of entitled expectation. She wore a designer pantsuit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair and makeup flawless. She walked in as if she owned the place, her mother trailing behind her like a proud general. Carson Hale was already waiting in the lobby, his face a clammy shade of gray. He looked nervous, constantly fidgeting with his tie. "They're making us wait," Madison commented loudly to her mother, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. The nerve. A polite but firm assistant finally appeared. "Ms. Clark, they're ready for you." She led them down a long, quiet hallway lined with framed architectural drawings of impressive buildings. The atmosphere here was starkly different from the warm, opulent ballroom. This was a place of power. It was corporate, cold, and serious. The air was still and smelled of expensive leather and quiet money. The assistant opened two large oak doors, revealing a spacious boardroom. A massive, polished mahogany table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs. At one end of the room was a large screen, currently dark. The feeling of being summoned to the principal's office was unmistakable, and for the first time a flicker of unease penetrated Madison's arrogant facade. Why was this so formal? They took their seats at the table. Carson sat hunched, looking miserable. Madison and her mother sat tall, projecting an air of impatient authority. They expected a junior manager, perhaps even Carson's boss, to come in and offer a prepared apology. They had their demands ready. They were prepared for a negotiation they were certain they would win. They were completely unprepared for what was about to happen next. The silence in the room stretched on, each second amplifying the cold corporate tension. The trap was set. All that was left was for the architect of this reckoning to make her entrance. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open and Elaine Brooks walked in. The transformation was so absolute, so stunning, that for a moment it seemed as if a different person entirely had entered the room. Gone was the simple cream dress, the understated jewelry, the quiet, observant guest. In her place stood a titan of industry. She wore a tailored navy blue suit that was the color of power and money. It was cut with a precision that spoke of bespoke craftsmanship. A single, elegant strand of pearls graced her neck, and her hair was swept up in a sophisticated style that highlighted the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. She carried a leather portfolio, and her walk was not the gentle pace of the woman from the night before, but the confident, purposeful stride of a commander entering her war room. She radiated an aura of calm, unshakable authority. Madison was mid-sentence, complaining to her mother about the wait, when she looked up. Her words caught in her throat, strangled by a gasp of disbelief. Her perfectly painted mouth fell open. Her mother's jaw literally dropped, her face a mask of slack-jawed shock. Beside them, Carson Hale went from pale to ghostly white. He looked as if he had seen an apparition, and in a way he had. He saw his career flashing before his eyes. The silence that fell over the boardroom was not just quiet. It was suffocating. It was the sound of a universe being reordered, of a power dynamic shifting so violently it sucked all the air out of the room. Elaine walked to the head of the table, the seat of ultimate authority, and placed her portfolio down. She didn't look at them immediately. She took her time arranging her chair, opening her portfolio, her calm, deliberate movements, amplifying the tension to an unbearable degree. She finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over the three of them. Her eyes were not angry or triumphant. They were cool, clear, and analytical, the eyes of a CEO assessing a failed investment. On the table in front of her was a small, polished brass nameplate. Madison's eyes were drawn to it, as if pulled by an invisible force. The engraved letters seemed to burn into her vision. Elaine Brooks, CEO. Brooks Hospitality Group. Madison's mind scrambled to make sense of the impossible reality confronting her. The cleaning lady, the help, the woman she had publicly humiliated, was the CEO, the owner, the name on the building. It was a truth so staggering it felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind from her lungs and sending her world into a dizzying spin. Elaine let the silence stretch for another few seconds, allowing the full weight of the revelation to sink in, to crush their arrogance into fine dust. Then she folded her hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. When she spoke, her voice was the same soft, controlled tone from the night before. But in this context, it was not gentle. It was glacial. It was the sound of judgment being delivered. "So," she said, her voice cutting through the thick silence like a diamond blade. "Let's talk about how you treat people you think are beneath you." The reckoning had begun. Madison's carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement shattered in an instant. The illusion of her own superiority, the foundation upon which she had built her entire identity, crumbled to dust. She stared at Elaine Brooks, the woman in the power suit, and saw not just the CEO of a hospitality empire, but the ghost of her own colossal, life-altering mistake. Her mind was a maelstrom of denial and horror. It couldn't be true. The quiet, simple woman from the wedding couldn't possibly be this figure of immense power and authority. But the nameplate on the table was irrefutable. The cold confidence in Elaine's eyes was undeniable. I don't understand," Madison stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. It was the first time in her life she had been rendered truly speechless. "Let me make it perfectly clear for you," Elaine said, her tone remaining unnervingly calm. She opened the portfolio in front of her. "Last night, you were a guest at a private event on my property. You publicly humiliated another guest, who happened to be my son's mother." She paused, letting that last fact land with the force of a battering ram. "Who happens to be me?" Madison's mother finally found her voice, though it was thin and reedy. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea. If we had known who you were—" "And that is the entire point," Elaine cut her off, her gaze sharp as a razor. "The fact that you needed to know who I was to treat me with basic human decency is precisely why we are sitting here today. You see, I was raised to believe that you judge a person's character by how they treat the person who can do nothing for them. By that measure, your character and your daughter's is utterly bankrupt." Elaine gestured to the large screen on the wall. It flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear multi-angle view from the ballroom's security cameras. The audio was pristine. They watched the entire scene from the night before unfold in stark, undeniable detail. They saw Madison's face twist in a sneer. They heard her sharp, ugly words. "Who let the help sit here?" They saw the shocked faces of the guests. They saw Ethan's paralysis. They saw Elaine's dignified exit. It was a brutal, unsparing replay of their own ugliness. When the video ended, the room was silent again. Madison was pale, her hands trembling in her lap. Her mother looked horrified, all her blustering arrogance gone, replaced by a raw, primal fear. "As you can see," Elaine continued, "the terms of our event contract were clearly violated. But this is no longer just a contractual issue." She pressed a button on the conference phone. "Jasmine, could you come in, please?" The boardroom doors opened and Jasmine Rivera walked in. She was no longer in her waitress uniform. She wore professional business attire. She looked nervous, but resolute. She stood beside Elaine, her head held high. "Jasmine was a member of the catering staff last night," Elaine explained. "She witnessed the entire incident. Jasmine, would you please tell us what you saw?" In a clear, steady voice, Jasmine recounted everything she had witnessed, her words painting a damning picture of Madison's deliberate cruelty. She spoke of the bride's tone, the manager's complicity, and the heavy atmosphere that had ruined the event. As Jasmine finished, the boardroom doors opened one more time. Ethan walked in. His face was a mask of cold disappointment. He didn't look at Madison. He looked only at his mother. "I'm here, Mom," he said quietly. Elaine nodded. "Ethan, thank you for coming." The sight of Ethan, so clearly aligned with his mother, was the final devastating blow. Madison's defenses crumbled completely. The dam of her arrogance broke, and a torrent of desperate, pleading sobs burst forth. "Ethan, baby, please," she cried, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Ethan finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were devoid of the love and adoration she was used to seeing. They were filled with a profound, unshakable disillusionment. "You humiliated my mother," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "The woman who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me. You showed me who you are, Madison, and I believe you." The power dynamic in the room had not just reversed, it had been annihilated. Madison, who had entered the room feeling powerful and entitled, was now a weeping, broken figure, begging for a forgiveness she would not receive. Her world had been turned upside down not by a shout, but by the quiet, methodical, and absolute assertion of a truth she had been too arrogant to see. The public spectacle she had created the night before was nothing compared to the private, devastating reckoning she was facing now. And across the table, Elaine Brooks watched, her expression unchanging, a silent testament to the fact that true power is never loud, but it is always, in the end, absolute. The story did not stay contained within the cold walls of the boardroom. In the age of social media, secrets have wings, and scandals travel at the speed of light. Guests from the wedding, who had whispered in shocked tones the night before, now had a stunning conclusion to their story. The news spread like wildfire through their affluent social circles, then burst into the public domain. It started with a single anonymous blog post, likely from a wedding guest who had connected the dots. The headline was electric. "Arrogant bride calls groom's millionaire mother the help. Turns out, mom owns the five-star wedding venue." The story was irresistible. It had a clear villain, a dignified hero, and a dramatic, satisfying twist. News outlets picked it up within hours. Viral headlines exploded across the internet. "Wedding nightmare, bride's classist rant backfires in epic fashion." "Meet the CEO mom who taught her future daughter-in-law a lesson in humility." "Socialite bride's career in tatters after publicly shaming fiancé's mother." Madison's carefully curated public image, her brand as an up-and-coming lifestyle influencer and socialite, was incinerated in a matter of hours. The comment sections were a brutal torrent of public condemnation. Sponsors for her minor brand deals pulled out, issuing public statements distancing themselves from her abhorrent behavior. The charity board she sat on, which valued public image above all else, quietly requested her resignation. Her perfect life, built on a foundation of image and connections, collapsed like a house of cards. The public fallout was swift, merciless, and absolute. For Carson Hale, the complicit event manager, the consequences were just as immediate, though far less public. Back in the boardroom after Ethan's final words, Elaine had turned her cool gaze to him. "Mr. Hale," she had said, her voice leaving no room for argument, "your employment with the Brooks Hospitality Group is terminated, effective immediately. Your willingness to sacrifice the dignity of an individual to placate a client is not a quality we value in our management team. Security will escort you from the property." Carson had stammered, pleaded, but it was useless. He was a casualty of his own cowardice, a man who had chosen the wrong side, and now had to face the consequences. He left the estate, a broken, unemployed man, his reputation in the high-end event industry destroyed. But for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. While Madison's world was collapsing, another was just beginning to blossom. A week after the disastrous wedding, Elaine summoned Jasmine Rivera back to her office. Jasmine arrived, her heart pounding with anxiety, unsure of what to expect. Elaine greeted her with a warm smile. "Jasmine," she said, "in my life, I have found that courage and integrity are the rarest and most valuable commodities. What you did took both. You risked your job to do what was right, and that is the kind of character I want at the heart of my company." She slid a folder across the desk. "This is a job offer," Elaine continued. "We have an opening for an assistant event director here at Brooks Hospitality. The position comes with a full salary, benefits, and a tuition reimbursement program to help you finish your degree. I believe you have the potential to be an exceptional leader. Your judgment is sound." Jasmine stared at the folder, then at Elaine, her eyes wide with disbelief. Tears welled up, tears not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude. She had acted out of conscience, never expecting a reward. In a world that so often seemed to punish doing the right thing, here was proof that sometimes integrity was seen and valued. She accepted the offer, her voice thick with emotion. The world of the story was one of swift and decisive justice. Every character's fate was a direct result of the choices they had made. The words used to describe the reactions in the news reports and social media posts were stark and powerful. Madison was stunned. Her mother was shocked. Carson was speechless. Their faces had all gone pale in that boardroom, a gallery of defeated arrogance. For Jasmine, there was a different set of words: validated, respected, and promoted. Justice in this story was not a slow, grinding process. It was a lightning strike, illuminating the moral landscape for all to see. The final meeting between Ethan and Madison was not in a boardroom or a fancy restaurant. It was in a quiet, neutral coffee shop a few days after the story had gone viral. The glamour of their life together had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, uncomfortable truth of who they were. Madison had been calling him incessantly, her texts a desperate string of apologies, excuses, and pleas. He had agreed to meet her one last time, not for her, but for himself. He needed closure. She looked different. The polished, confident sheen she always wore had been replaced by a weary desperation. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, and she fidgeted nervously with her coffee cup. The arrogance was gone, but what was left was not genuine remorse. It was the frantic terror of someone who had lost everything. "Ethan, please," she began before he even had a chance to speak. "You have to believe me. I am so sorry. I'll do anything. I'll apologize to your mother every day for the rest of my life. We can get through this. We love each other." Ethan listened quietly, his expression unreadable. He let her talk, let her pour out all the frantic promises and self-serving regrets. When she finally ran out of words, her shoulders slumping in defeat, he finally spoke. His voice was not angry. It was quiet, steady, and filled with a sad finality. "I've been thinking a lot about the word love, Madison," he said, looking at her directly for the first time. "I thought I knew what it meant. I thought it was about attraction and shared dreams and building a life together." He shook his head slowly. "But I was wrong. That's only part of it. I realized, standing by that lake with my mom, that love without respect isn't real. It's an illusion." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You didn't just insult a stranger, Maddie. You showed contempt for the very idea of where I come from. My mother started with nothing. She cleaned rooms for people just like you, people who looked right through her. Her strength, her humility, her dignity, that's the foundation of my life. When you insulted her, you insulted the best part of me." Tears streamed down Madison's face. "But I didn't know. If I had known she was rich, I would have..." And that's the problem, Ethan interrupted gently. It shouldn't matter. Her worth isn't determined by her bank account. It's in her character. And your action showed me yours. He reached into his pocket and placed the large diamond engagement ring on the table between them. It glittered under the fluorescent lights of the coffee shop, a relic from a future that would never happen. The engagement is over, Madison, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. I can't build a life with someone I can't respect, and who can't respect the people who matter most to me. Madison stared at the ring, then at him, her face crumpling in a final desperate plea. But she saw in his eyes that it was truly over. There was no negotiation, no second chance. His decision was made. He stood up from the table. I do hope you learn from this, he said, a genuine, if distant note of sincerity in his voice. Goodbye, Madison. He turned and walked away without looking back. He walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon sun, a weight lifting from his shoulders with every step. He was not a triumphant victor. He was a man who had been forced to confront a painful truth about the person he thought he loved and about himself. But as he walked away, he was not broken. He was free. He was his mother's son again, wiser for the lesson, and ready to start a new chapter, one built on a foundation of true respect. Weeks later, the grand ballroom of Brooks Estates was once again filled with people. The crystal chandeliers cast the same warm golden glow, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The air was not thick with tension and privilege, but with a sense of purpose and community. Elaine Brooks was hosting the annual gala for her charitable foundation, an organization dedicated to providing educational scholarships and vocational training for low-income single parents. Elaine stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of supportive faces. She wore an elegant, deep blue gown, and she radiated a quiet, powerful grace. Beside the stage, coordinating the event with a confident and professional air, was Jasmine Rivera. She was no longer a nervous waitress, but the assistant event director, a role she had taken to with natural talent and dedication. She caught Elaine's eye and gave her an encouraging smile. Elaine smiled back and then addressed the crowd. Welcome, everyone, she began, her voice warm and clear. It is wonderful to see you all here tonight. This ballroom, like many places, has been the setting for many different kinds of stories. A hush fell over the room. Many of the guests knew the story of the wedding. It had become something of a local legend. Some of those stories are about joy and celebration, Elaine continued. Others are about lessons learned. I started my career in rooms just like this one, but I wasn't a guest. I was the person cleaning them. I learned early on that there are two ways to see the world. You can look at people and see only their station, their uniform, their job title. Or you can look at them and see their humanity, their story, their potential. She spoke of her own journey, not with bitterness, but with a sense of gratitude for the lessons it had taught her. She didn't mention Madison by name. She didn't need to. This was not about public shaming. It was about sharing a deeper truth. I have been fortunate in my life, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room. But I have never forgotten that true power means nothing if it is not used to uplift others. True wealth is not measured by what you have, but by the dignity you give. Tonight, we are here to support people who are on their own difficult journeys, people who, right now, might feel invisible. Let's make sure we see them. When she finished her speech, the room erupted in a thunderous, heartfelt standing ovation. It was an applause not just for a wealthy philanthropist, but for a woman of immense character and integrity. Later in the evening, Ethan came to her side, a proud, loving smile on his face. He wrapped his arm around her. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Elaine looked at her son, her heart swelling with love. She saw the new wisdom in his eyes, the hard-won maturity. The past few weeks had been painful, but they had brought him back to himself, back to the values she had worked so hard to instill in him. They stood together, mother and son, looking out at the event. The ballroom, once a stage for humiliation, had been reclaimed. It was now a symbol of hope, a testament to the idea that dignity, once challenged, could rise again, stronger and more radiant than ever before. And so, the story comes to a close. It serves as a powerful reminder to never mistake humility for weakness, or a simple dress for a simple person. The quietest individual in the room might just be the most powerful. Be careful how you treat people because you never truly know their story. The person you look down on today might, in fact, own the very ground you stand on. The camera fades on Elaine Brooks, smiling at her son. She is not a symbol of revenge, but a living, breathing testament to grace, power, and justice fulfilled. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.